On a calm Tuesday morning in the heart of Dallas, Texas, an incident took place that would forever alter the lives of all those involved. A black man, dressed in a sharp, charcoal gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase, walked confidently into a high-end restaurant known as The Grange. This wasn't just any ordinary eatery. The Grange was celebrated across the city for its sleek, modern design and its fusion of Southern comfort food with a contemporary flair. The man, later identified as Nathaniel Nate Harper, entered the establishment with a calm but assertive presence, the kind of demeanor you'd expect from someone familiar with such upscale venues. However, what awaited him wasn't the warm hospitality one might expect in the South. It was something far less inviting. As soon as he stepped through the door, an uncomfortable air seemed to fall over the space. At the host's stand, Melanie, a recently hired staff member with strawberry blonde hair tied up in a high ponytail, looked up and immediately gave Nate a once-over. Her expression soured, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Her body language screamed dismissal as she scanned him from head to toe. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone noticeably lacking the usual warmth extended to other guests. Nate, maintaining his composure, responded with a polite smile. "Yes, table for one, please." Melanie hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed as if his simple request had been an inconvenience. She glanced around the dining room, which was clearly not at full capacity, before answering coldly, "We're full." "You'll have to wait." Nate raised an eyebrow, noting the abundance of empty tables visible from where he stood. "That's fine," he said calmly, and took a seat in the waiting area. For nearly 20 minutes, Nate sat patiently, though his occasional glances at the host's stand revealed that his patience was wearing thin. During that time, he noticed staff members glancing at him out of the corner of their eyes and overheard the occasional murmur followed by muffled laughter. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and it didn't take long for Nate to piece together the reasons for it. When he approached the host's stand again, Melanie barely looked up. "Any updates on my table?" Nate asked, his voice steady but firm. Melanie let out a huff, her irritation barely masked. "Look, I don't know what you think you're trying to do, but this isn't the kind of place for people like you," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. Nate blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of her statement. "Excuse me?" he asked, his tone sharp but controlled. "You heard me," she said, pointing toward the door. "You need to leave." At that moment, several diners turned to watch the exchange, their curiosity piqued. Nate took a glance around and saw a few people shaking their heads in disbelief, while others whispered amongst themselves. But before Nate could respond, another employee, Carl, a tall and broad-shouldered man, approached. "Is there a problem here?" Carl asked, his expression making it clear who he thought was at fault. "This man is refusing to leave," Melanie said, her voice tinged with indignation. Carl turned to Nate, his expression stern. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Nate, taking a deep breath, reined in his frustration. "I'd like to speak to the manager," he said evenly. Carl folded his arms across his chest. "I am the manager," he replied, his tone smug. Nate nodded slowly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Then you might want to double-check the name on the lease," he said, his words cutting through the tension, "because this is my restaurant." The statement hit the room like a bombshell, and the silence that followed rippled through the dining area. Melanie's jaw dropped, and Carl's face drained of color. A nervous laugh escaped Melanie's lips. "You? The owner?" she said incredulously, disbelief clear in her voice. Without missing a beat, Nate pulled out his phone, tapping a few buttons before holding it up. On the screen was an email from the Grange's official email account, clearly confirming his position as the owner and CEO of the restaurant. Carl's face paled further, and Melanie instinctively took a step back. "This has to be fake," Melanie stammered, her earlier confidence vanishing. "Would you like me to call corporate?" Nate asked, his tone cool and collected. Carl, unable to find the words, stuttered, I didn't know," finally managing to form a response. Nate pressed on, his voice sharp with conviction. "You didn't know what? That a black man could own a place like this?" By now, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Diners pulled out their phones to capture the unfolding drama, and whispers of outrage spread like wildfire. Nate, undeterred, turned to both Carl and Melanie, his voice now firm and authoritative. "I'll give you one chance to explain yourselves," he said. "Why did you treat me this way?" Carl stared at the floor, unable to meet Nate's eyes, while Melanie nervously fiddled with the edge of her apron. Neither of them responded. "Nothing to say?" Nate continued, his voice growing colder. "That's fine. Let me make this simple. You're both fired." Effective immediately. Melanie snapped her head up, her voice trembling. You can't do that, she exclaimed. I absolutely can, Nate replied firmly. And I just did. Carl, attempting to defend himself, opened his mouth. Mr. Harper, I've been here for... Save it, Nate interrupted, his voice cutting through Carl's words. If this is how you treat people when you think no one's watching, you don't deserve to work here. Nate then turned to the rest of the staff, his voice softening but still carrying weight. This restaurant was built to be a place where everyone feels welcome. If any of you think otherwise, if any of you think discrimination is acceptable, you can leave right now. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and a few nodded in agreement, clearly uncomfortable with the events that had unfolded. Meanwhile, several diners began applauding Nate, showing their support for his stance. One woman approached Nate afterward, shaking his hand. Thank you, she said sincerely. People need to see there are consequences for this kind of behavior. The story quickly went viral. Within days, a video of the confrontation had millions of views, and news outlets across the country picked up the story. Nate was hailed for his poise and unwavering stance against racism. I didn't do this for attention, he told a local news outlet. I did it because it was the right thing to do. No one should be treated like that, especially not in a place that's supposed to feel like home. In the weeks that followed, the Grange experienced an outpouring of support. Customers lined up to show their solidarity with a business that stood for inclusion and equality. Meanwhile, Carl and Melanie faced significant public backlash as their names and faces circulated on social media. But Nate refused to dwell on their downfall. Instead, he focused on improving his restaurant, implementing mandatory diversity training for his staff. Months later, Nate received an email from Carl. The subject line read an apology and a confession. Curious but cautious, Nate opened it. Inside, Carl revealed a shocking truth. The former owner of the Grange, Charles Bradshaw, had orchestrated the entire incident. Bradshaw had approached Carl after Nate bought the restaurant, offering him a substantial sum to create negative press in an effort to force Nate to sell. I let my greed and prejudice cloud my judgment, Carl admitted. But after seeing how you handled that day, and the backlash that followed, I realized I was wrong. I hope you can forgive me. Though anger initially surged within Nate, it quickly gave way to a sense of resolve. He knew that this injustice couldn't go unanswered. The next morning, Nate met with his attorney, armed with Carl's email and a determination to seek justice. We're going after Bradshaw, he declared. The ensuing legal battle was fierce. Nate's legal team uncovered a series of communications that proved Bradshaw's deliberate attempts to sabotage the restaurant. The case attracted national attention, and when the verdict came down, it was swift. Bradshaw was ordered to pay a substantial settlement, and his reputation was left in ruins. Nate, however, chose not to focus on the victory. Instead, he donated a portion of the settlement to local organizations fighting against racism, using the rest to expand the Grange. Years later, the Grange had grown into a thriving chain, with locations across the country, each proudly displaying the slogan, "Everyone is welcome at our table." Thank you for watching this inspiring story of resilience, justice, and hope. Let it remind us that change begins when we stand up for what's right, even when faced with adversity. At Motivation Wow, we believe in the power of stories to inspire kindness, break down barriers, and bring people together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Until next time, stay inspired and keep making a difference.